rely on marketing more than ever to connect with audiences. One podcast aims to make sense of it all. This is Movies and Marketing.
Next Saturday night, we're sending you back to the future.
Go ahead. Make my day.
How about you, you crazy Dutch bastard? What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Take a look around. You're at the threshold of hell.
We might as well have a good time.
I am an FBI agent.
Hey everyone, I'm Patrick.
And this is Shad.
And this is Movies and Marketing. I don't really need to say that, do I?
You can say it if you want to say it. You can do whatever you want. You make your own laws.
So in this episode, everyone, we're going to be talking about Point Break from 1991, not the remake from just a couple years ago in 2016.
No.
We actually don't acknowledge that as a real movie.
No. We've erased it from... We actually went and had a procedure done to remove it from our cerebral cortex.
We actually did the exact same procedure as Arnold Schwarzenegger in Total Recall. We just removed those memories.
Yeah, it's gone forever. Let's hope.
But today we're going to be revisiting the marketing for this classic movie to see if it delivers, if it continues to deliver years later, almost 30 years.
It's crazy.
And really just because we love this movie. We love Point Break. We quote this movie on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think if you want to get a general sense of our taste in movies, this is a good place to start. It's like the Holy Grail to us.
Which may make you like us more or be like, these guys. I can't ever listen to these guys. These two wild and crazy guys talking about Point Break being their favorite movie. What is this?
I'm hanging up this podcast right now. Oh, wait, I can't quit them. What am I talking about? They just live to get radical.
You know, it's not tragic dying doing what you love, Shad.
It's not tragic doing a podcast about something that you love, Patrick.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to do this time to time with movies that we like, hold up, consider classics or we think is interesting. Just take a trip into the past and revisit the movie and the marketing around it and just look at it from the perspective of the present. One, because it's interesting. Two, because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and more so because it's fun.
Yeah. So let's start where we always like to start. You know, we'll do a little bit of number crunching. Let's take a look at, was the movie a hit back in its day? So Point Break comes out summer 1991. It's got a budget of $24 million. It makes $43 million domestic. Yeah, pretty good. $83 million worldwide. It's the 29th highest grossing movie of 1991, which is okay. It's behind a lot of movies you would think it should do better than, like, I don't know, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
It should have definitely been in front of Bugsy.
Yeah. You know, 2 spots in front of it is The Rocketeer. So it did beat out Keanu Reeves' other movie of that year, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. So there's that.
Yeah. There were a lot of great movies that year. If you look at the list, I mean, Terminator 2, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Those were the 2 big movies of that summer.
Yeah. But then you've got stuff that became classics like Hook. You've got Backdraft in there.
Yeah, Backdraft's a good one. Silence of the Lambs came out that year.
Yeah. What about Bob?
Yeah. Hot Shots.
Yeah, Hot Shots. The Last Boy Scout was actually a really good movie. My Girl, Boys in the Hood. I liked Doc Hollywood. I know that doesn't get as much play today, but Michael J. Fox.
I saw that one in the theater, I think, at the time. Also, one of Van Damme's best came out that year, Double Impact.
Yeah. That overlooked that altogether.
Yeah. So all around, pretty good year. I remember that as being the summer of Terminator 2. You know, that was the movie that kind of owned that summer. But Point Break does all right. It was the 13th highest grossing movie of the summer, which means it was basically in the middle of the pack. The critical response, where it currently sits on Rotten Tomatoes, is 68%, which is about where you would expect this movie to be, I would think. Audience score is at 79%. The critics' consensus is pretty interesting. It says, absurd, over the top, and often wildly entertaining. Point Break is here to show you that the human spirit is still alive. I like that summary.
Yes, that is a great summary.
So do you remember when you saw this movie for the first time?
I know where I was in the theater, and yeah, I remember that movie like it was yesterday watching it. It's so weird how vivid that memory is in my brain. It's why I became a surfing FBI agent, Chad. I mean,
It's one of the most important moments of your life.
yeah. Did you catch it in the theaters?
I did not, which is weird. I'm not sure why, because this was probably, I was like 12 or 13, then this is my peak window of going to the movie theater. This is whenever we didn't have anything to do, we were going to the movies. So I'm not sure how I didn't end up seeing it at the movie theater. I saw Doc Hollywood at the movie theater. I'm not sure how I didn't go to Point Break, but I remember watching it on video or cable and then just watching it a ton over and over. And then one of those movies you just kept coming back to. This holds the distinction of maybe one or two movies that I've owned in every format I've had. VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, digital now. I'm sure one day I will purchase the immersive holographic version and Night Surf with Bodie in Utah.
Yeah, I mean, he'll take you to the edge and beyond, Shad.
It's about the ride, man. The ultimate ride.
You just got me excited for holographic movie watching.
Which I just made up.
I love that. But, I also enjoyed the soundtrack of this movie.
Yeah. I remember I owned the soundtrack too, and I probably got it from BMG or something. That's dating myself. Or Columbia House. And it was primarily for the song I Will Not Fall, which is used in one of the best movie montages of all time, where Johnny Utah learns to surf. I will not fall.
I will not fall. Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just such a good jam. And I think that was probably just the song I played over and over. I'm not sure if I listened to anything else on the soundtrack.
When they're jumping out of the plane, when they're skydiving in this movie, all of the score is really well done. I think it adds to the movie that makes it so powerful. I get people are going to go, Point Break, a powerful movie, and I'm going to say to you, you're darn right, it's powerful.
And I'm going to say to you, definitely. Yeah, the music that's one of those things you forget about. The music is great. It goes from like that mystical surfery music to that, intense bank robbery music.
Yeah. It all just flows so well.
Yeah, everything just sort of clicks with this one.
I will also say, just as a personal note, I even named my new puppy Bodie. Bodie the 50-year storm Jebber, after Patrick Swayze's character.
If that doesn't demonstrate your commitment, I'm talking about owning it on multiple formats. You got to one-up me. Take it to the next level. Now I have to have another child and name it Roach or something just to surpass you.
If you name your next child Roach, you'll be the winner.
I'll say I'll be winning. I'm sure you could think of something better.
I don't know, man. If I befriend your son Roach and then convince him to become a bank robber,
then I'll have to invite Gary Busey to move into my house. It's just going to get out of control. We should probably stop this now.
Yeah, especially if you're going to invite current day Gary Busey to live in your home. That's commitment right there, man.
I don't know if there's a good time of Busey to have live in your home.
Well, I will say Point Break Gary Busey seems less likely to shit and piss on your floors if you invite him into your home than current day Gary Busey.
It's funny. You have a dog named Bodie. I have Gary Busey. Which one do you think is more likely to shit or piss on your floor?
I gotta be honest. I'd say the Gary Busey.
I think definitely.
Makes me actually a little sad I didn't name my dog Gary Busey.
Well, there's always the next dog.
I mean, I don't want to set it up for failure, though, either, so.
That's true. You want to give it a chance.
Bad Gary Busey. Bad. All right, we went off on a little bit of a tangent. So, was the marketing good for this movie? What did you think? Obviously, we have to go back. Hindsight's a little easier, too, when you've got that many years behind you. But what do you think, looking back at this, the trailer, the posters, was the marketing good? How did you feel about it?
I was surprised because most things you look at, especially from that period, like the early 90s, don't hold up very well. This holds up really well. The marketing for this movie is actually pretty great. I feel like they kind of nailed it. Even looking at the poster, they kind of got it all right. It knew exactly what this movie was and what elements to highlight. If you look at the poster, it's got number one, the two stars, first and foremost, with their serious looks and big heads. Then it's got number two, the bank robbers with their ex-president mask for added intrigue. Number three, got a wave breaking against the rocks, which is surfing with a little bit of danger in there. And then there's this pitch, this summary for the movie on there that says 27 banks in 3 years. Anything to catch the perfect wave. Just looking at that, and they got this Point Break font they put together, which is blocky and uses these sunset colors. This is the surfing bank robbers movie. This is how we market it. This is what it is. They got the tagline on the poster right below the title, 100% pure adrenaline. That's a great tagline. They just knew exactly what they were doing with the marketing, and they put it together really well, I thought. What'd you think?
The marketing for 1991, I go back because we have to sort of put it in perspective. The marketing for 1991 was right on the money. I mean, it showed the two main stars that were big at that time. Patrick Swayze coming off of Dirty Dancing in 87, Roadhouse in 89, Ghost in 90, and then went on to almost do nothing else of importance after this movie.
That's a run, though. That's a good run,
yeah,
right?
I mean, he was just on top. I mean, and I'm just naming some of the giant ones that everybody thinks of when they think of Patrick Swayze, I love that dude, obviously, R.I.P. Great actor, I think, great character in all those movies. And, Keanu Reeves is pretty big at that time and went on to do some still pretty big movies. But it had them front and center in this idea of pure adrenaline. It was a summertime movie.
Yeah. The trailer was what I was really expecting to be pretty dated, and it's not. Maybe because there's so much good stuff in the movie, but they do it pretty well. It starts off with these cuts between a surfer and bank robbery, which again lays clear that premise. Surfing bank robbers, extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Clear from the get-go. They knew what they had here. But then they're like, a ton of the quotable lines from the movie are in the trailer. So they knew in 91, these are quotable lines, which is impressive. Usually that stuff kind of develops over time. But it felt like, they had a handle on that. They had a finger on that pulse at the moment to shove that all in. And the trailer does. It plays like a greatest hits package.
Yeah. I think to myself, do they know those are quotable or do they become quotable because of the movie? I'm not sure what comes first, you know what I mean?
Chicken or the egg.
I often say this movie is my guilty pleasure, right? Because there's a lot of people that don't feel the same way about this movie. And when I tell them that this is one of the greatest movies of all time, they go, "What are you talking about right now? What movie?" And I think that's because the movie it's an action movie that it does take itself seriously. I mean, it's trying to be an action movie, but it's not really deep, although it has some deep moments.
It's fake deep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But there's a lot of really good things that happen in this movie that I think are underappreciated.
Yeah. There's all these layers to it, but usually there's a movie where there's 5 great parts of it or 5 great lines of it, and you're like, oh, it's a great movie. This movie's just stuffed. I mean, it's overflowing. Almost every part of it, you're like, now comes this part, now comes this part, now comes this line, and this line, and this line, and this line. I mean, it's just, you talk about The Godfather, something everybody thinks is great, and it has all these moments and lines that people remember. I mean, this movie has just as many, if not more. This is going to sound like a Point Break thing to say, but you almost have to open your mind and perceptions to this movie being able to be a great movie before you can accept it. That's total, Bodie would love that.
You have to open your consciousness and let the movie in.
Exactly. Talking about things that aren't there, though. What about some of the stuff that's in the trailer that's not in the movie, which I thought was one of the great surprises of watching this?
Yeah, it happens on occasion that you watch a trailer and you go, wait a second, I watched that movie. That scene did not take place. There's a scene cut from the movie that's in the trailer where Harp, who is played by John C. McGinley, where he says, do you think the taxpayers would like it if they knew they were paying a federal agent to surf and pick up girls? And Keanu Reeves responds, babes. And he says, beg your pardon? He says, the correct terms is babes, sir. So that got cut.
They were probably like, it's too close to, I caught my first tube today, sir. Which there's also a different version of in the trailer.
True. And then I think we're talking about the scene where Bodie and Johnny are riding in the truck together, right?
Which to me was the big one. This was the hidden gem, the real thing. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, where Johnny fires the gun out the window and Bodie says, it's going to be a great day, Johnny. That clearly didn't happen.
No, and I even like to think about, how did that exist within the movie?
Yeah.
What are they doing that they're riding in the truck and Utah's just firing his gun out the window?
It doesn't fit the movie at all. There had to have been more to that. There had to have been more story narrative that followed that path, because otherwise that scene does not fit whatsoever within the movie,
Is that a dream? Like, what's going on there?
right? It's understandable why it got cut.
Yeah. The last thing I'll kind of mention marketing-wise is the updated look for the cover of the DVD Blu-ray, the Pure Adrenaline edition, which I think came out around 2000 or somewhere around there, where they gave it more of the steel blue look to it. They just gave it a little bit of a harder look. I really liked that. I thought that was a great little update as the movie moved into this classic phase.
And it's definitely a stronger design than the original. So were there any other missed marketing opportunities in this? Did you think that they could have or should have done anything better with the marketing?
You know, I went into this with this question on my mind. I'm like, I bet you I'm going to go back. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to go back and I'm going to come up with all these ideas of where I could have marketed Point Break and it would have been way better and would have been a huge hit. And I got nothing. I think they did exactly what they should have done. I think they knew the selling point of this movie and they rode it like a gnarly wave, bruh.
Yeah, was the marketing perfect? Maybe there could have been something they could have done better. But, you know, again, they were competing against Terminator 2. But what the marketing lacked, the movie made up for. And it created this cult classic film that still holds up today, almost 30 years later. So
I know. Why do you think, Patrick, why has this movie lived on? What makes this a classic? Why are we still talking about it? And does it translate to the next generation?
let me just say, in 1991, 2-hour movies weren't as popular as they are today. The movie clocks in at about 2 hours and 2 minutes, but it flies by. The movie doesn't feel like 2 hours. That's the really awesome thing about it, is that it's so enjoyable. You go through and it's very quick, very fast-paced, a lot of action, a lot of adventure, if you will, and it's enjoyable. The other thing is it's quotable. You know, we talked about that. I think about Christmas Vacation in '89 as another movie that's become a classic over time and bigger because of its quotability, something that we could just keep talking about.
Yeah, I think you definitely hit on a few of the key things. You know, rewatching this again recently, it is crazy how this movie just zips along. I mean, there are lessons in pacing. You watch some movies now and they're just like plodding. But man, this movie right from the get-go, it's like it's a full-on sprint, going from scene to scene to scene to scene. And it's not like you're ever like confused at where you are, don't know what's going on. It's all cohesive. And I think a lot of that's due to Catherine Bigelow, the director, who's a really good director, an Academy Award winner now. And she just did a really good job. There's some, amazing action sequences in this movie. But yeah, it just flies along. That's the one thing that I think helps it not to be dated, is it just has that fast pace going for it. Quotability is huge. That's just what makes movies stand up over time if you can keep throwing out these lines. That's all the movies that we're talking about 20, 30, 40 years later are movies that at least like 5 lines you're like spouting off from. So I think that's a huge one. And the other thing is it just has that, thing where you can go back and watch it after you haven't seen it in a couple of years and you find something new or interesting about it, or this other piece about it. Last time I watched it, I was like, man, Busey is really good and really entertaining in this movie. He probably should have won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar. I think he's like that good in this movie and like adds that much to it. The actor filling this role, which, has some good lines, but could have been just a standard role. He really adds something new to it and makes that part great.
Yeah, I agree. Busey's great in this. He had it together in this movie. Like, I felt like he was a great character and really brought a level of excitement to what is an otherwise pretty blah character, right? It's just there is like a backseat to Johnny Utah. But he has a really great spot in this movie.
Yeah, it just brings a lot of energy. Every line, he sells it, makes it his own.
Yeah. So is there anything else about the movie outside of that?
I just think, the thing about Point Break is there's not a lot of lessons like, if you want to make a good movie, do exactly what Point Break did. I don't think it has a lot of those because in my mind, Point Break is kind of a unicorn. I've told you before, 99.9% of the time, this movie doesn't work. Like this script, this actual movie, this premise, this concept, surfing bank robbers, it just doesn't work. But this one time, by luck or collection of talent or whatever, everything locked into place and it turned out amazing. And that's why the remake was a bad idea. They were just kind of pushing luck. It already worked this one time by sheer amazing chance. So there was really very little chance it would work again, even under the best circumstances, which I don't think they had. It's one of these things that's just kind of amazing. It's pure moviness is the way I think about it. Everything that happens is kind of absurd, kind of ridiculous. I think that's why some people don't like the movie. But for me, it just kind of functions on this other level where if you can accept it, and I think the movie sells everything in a way that I have no problem accepting anything that happens in it, you just have a blast watching it.
Yeah. So if you could pick a favorite part of the movie or your favorite line, what would it be? Or what would they be? I know you can't pick just one because it's Point Break, man.
Well, I'm going to force myself to kind of. In terms of favorite part, that's a tricky question. Are you just saying, sequence or scene? Or are you saying, like what aspect of the movie? So I'll answer both. Just to cheat a little bit. But my favorite, scene or sequence, we talk about action scenes when they raid the house of the drug-dealing surf group about midway through the movie. It's just wild, chaotic, intense. They just raid this house. There's a lot of gunfire, smashing through windows. There's a lawnmower. Anthony Kiedis shoots himself in the foot. Just really love that part of the movie. I mean, that part, just one of my favorite action sequences ever in a movie.
Yeah, that is a good scene. That scene with the lawnmower is pretty intense because the suspense there, it feels like it's really happening, like he is close to putting his face in that lawnmower.
Yeah, which, geez, face in a lawnmower.
Yeah.
But I think, and if I'm talking about my favorite aspect of the movie, what makes this movie work for me, it's Keanu Reeves, man. He is what makes this movie what it is. He's just all in every scene. He's so, physical. He has that Keanu line delivery that some people make fun of, but I think especially here, it just really works. And it makes, a lot of these lines so quotable when they wouldn't necessarily be anything special. I just think this movie doesn't work without him. I try to think of, other people at the time. I don't know who you'd put in there. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It just doesn't quite work. Keanu is this movie to me. He's what makes it. It's probably his finest moment, and he's been in a lot of good movies.
Yeah, we've had this discussion multiple times. Keanu is the perfect person for this movie. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And this role was made for Keanu. You know what I mean? It feels like this is him as a person. And almost every movie that he's made since then, I feel like I'm watching Johnny Utah. In a lot of movies, I feel like, God, there's a lot of Johnny Utah in his character right now. But yeah, he makes the movie. We've talked about all the great characters in this. I mean, you've got Swayze, Busey, John C. McGinley, Lori Petty, Anthony Kiedis, the tiniest role in this movie. Let me tell you something. He sells it.
He's great. His haircut's great, and he's great.
For sure. A lot of great people in it. And I will say that Bodhi, Patrick Swayze, just had this very zen feeling about him. And so I think he was just the perfect person to play that role.
I mean, he's really good, and he just fits, and he's totally in it. I don't even think anybody else at the time could have done it. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody else could play a surfing bank robber.
But yeah, you mentioned that scene in the raid. I'll say the skydiving scene is great, both the initial jump that they do together and then the climax when Johnny jumps from the plane without a parachute. Great scenes in this movie. Being that I can't pick just one, I also love the fight scene with Bodhi and Johnny Utah when Anthony Kiedis and his cronies attack Johnny Utah at the beach, because it created a sense of camaraderie between Bodhi and Johnny Utah.
That last one's a really good one, too. And it does a lot of stuff. It seals them as these kindred spirits, where it also establishes Swayze as, he's a bank robber, but he's also a good guy. He lives by this different code.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff that happens because of him leading that group. But in the end, you don't want to see him go down. You gotta go down. People trusted you and they died. I will say what makes that movie great. Bodhi you never really actually see Bodhi caught or killed.
If you imagine the ending where either Johnny Utah kills him or takes him to jail, neither one of those is like a satisfying ending, right?
Right. Yeah, there's so many movies like that where you go, but that ending, this ending is everything I want in a movie. I mean, the bad guy gets kind of what's coming to him, right? But in a way that you feel satisfied.
Yeah. And Johnny throws his badge down in the water and, moves on to a higher plane of existence, beyond law. What are you doing, Utah?
We'll get him when he comes back in. He's not coming back.
So, best quote? What do you got for your best quote from the movie?
This is what I've called the hardest choice I've ever had to make in my life. There are like countless. You ask me on any day, it would probably change. I could think of a different one that I'd be like, well, that one's my favorite today. Bodhi's metal coffin speech is a great one. We do that one all the time. The last line we talked about, he's not coming back. Not a great line on paper, but the Keanu delivery sells it. You know, there's so many of them. But in the end, it just comes down to the classic. It's got to be this one.
Bodhi, this is your wake-up call, man. I am an FBI agent.
Bodhi, this is your wake-up call, man. I am an FBI agent. Just that delivery, the way Keanu does it, it just epitomizes everything that's insane, ridiculous, fun, and great about this movie, you know? It's a movie about our world, but it just doesn't exist in our world. It's on another planet, another universe, and that universe is just fantastic. What's your pick? What's your favorite line of Point Break?
When they skydive and he jumps without his parachute and he catches Bodhi and they hit the ground really hard.
And the parachute just opens and they hit.
Yeah, but they're all wrapped up in this parachute and Bodhi's like, you are one radical son of a bitch.
What a great scene of one-upmanship, too, because first, this is like the equivalent of you naming your dog Bodhi and me inviting Busey to live in my house. Utah jumps out of a plane without a parachute. That's how bad he wants to get Bodhi.
Yeah.
Catches him, actually manages to catch him, has him wrapped up holding a gun. Bodhi says, you got to drop the gun and open the chute, or we're both just going to die. I'm not opening the chute.
Yeah.
How hard are those dudes?
It's just over the top and it's so good.
It is. It's just constant craziness.
Right? You go into this movie going, your typical good guys trying to get the bad bank robbers, blah, blah, blah. It just, no other time has a movie existed in this universe to this level.
Yeah, where people make these kind of decisions. You know, you're like, oh, he jumped out of the plane. He doesn't have a parachute. I guess he's going to have to get him some other way. Oh no, he's jumping out of the plane after him without a parachute.
Yeah. And he grabbed the gun, and that's happening. Oh, yeah, and that's happening too. So one of our favorites, this will probably be our longest episode of MoMA, Movies and Marketing. And we sort of veered off track. We obviously demonstrated a lot of our love for this movie. The marketing took a back seat.
Yeah, it was incorporated. It was tucked in there. It's a podcast about marketing, but it's also fueled by our genuine love of movies, and Point Break is one of those movies.
Yeah. So that's it for today's episode of Movies and Marketing. Until next time, let's fade to black.
I'll be back.
He's not coming back.